Hi, everybody. I'm Walden Hughes, and I am welcoming back a good friend of ours, and Chuck Daughtry. Welcome back to SPERDVAC.
Thank you, Walden. It's good to be back. I'm looking forward to this big convention coming up at Halloween.
I
Are we
know.
supposed to wear costumes or just a mask?
Oh, I don't know. We'll have to find out what the dress code is. You're right.
What character would you come as for Halloween?
Oh my gosh. The shadow. How about the shadow? That way I don't
The
have to worry.
shadow. There you go. All right. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of man? The shadow does, or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's good to be back with you again.
Guys.
And I trust everybody is well and feeling good and ready to have a lot of fun this fall at this Halloween meeting. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was Halloween until just a little while ago. But that's good. The Halloween weekend.
You bet.
A year
How?
ago on the Halloween weekend, this is neither here nor there, I was on a cruise and I was
Ah.
dressed as Batman of all things. Anyway,
Anyway, Chuck, how in the world did you get over to WXYZ?
how did I get to WXYZ?
Yep.
Well, that I was hoping to get a job in Detroit, and so I came. I'd been a smaller station, and so I came and I auditioned at the major stations in Detroit. But now this is back in 1953, early 53, something like that. And so the CBS, the NBC, and the ABC station. And of course, none of them had openings, but only at WXYZ, I didn't realize it was an ABC owned and operated station. I thought it was just a local station, but no. But anyway, I found this out later, and I said, "Well, listen, is there anybody there that I'd like to find out if you think I have a future in this business, and could somebody, give me one of your auditions?" So that you could hear it and decide whether or not I'm wasting my time in this part of my young career at that time. And they said, "Well, wait a minute, let's check." And they came back and said, "Yes, fine, we've got some stuff." And so they put together their standard audition material, which happened to be the NBC audition, because just a few years prior to that, they were NBC. That was either the red or the blue network of NBC that got split up by the FCC back in the late 70s, 40s, I'm sorry, but the late 40s. And this was early in the 50s. And one of the first things, I don't know whether it was the red network or the blue network that became ABC. And the other one stayed as NBC. And anyway, one of the first things they did was bought WXYZ in Detroit, because WXYZ at that time had dramas, had live music, had 28 staff musicians, even when I was there. And so they actually were a network operation, but I didn't know this. And so they said, "Yeah, come on, we'll give you this audition." And it happened to be, as I said, the NBC audition, which included uh, uh, classical music, introducing symphonies and things like that. which was easy for me because I was a music major in college, which was okay. And then I had to read some news and do some commercials and a couple of things like that. And afterwards, when the thing was over, they said, "Yeah, that sounded very good." And I said, "Well, thank you. Do you think I've got a future in this business?" Oh, and they said, "Well, absolutely. We're going to keep your audition on file." I thought, well, sure they are. There was no such thing as tape in those days. And I had no idea they were recording it on a disc, cutting it on it. They had disc lays. That's where they cut and recorded the dramas, the Lone Ranger, the other shows, the ones that did not go directly to the network that got fed, or rather pressed and then sent out to the independent stations around the country for them to play. And so you hear that. Yeah, don't call us. We'll call you. We'll keep you on file. Well, lo and behold, about 3 weeks later, I got a letter from ABC. And I said, "What is this?" And they said, "Well, we one of our announcers is leaving us and going to, I can't remember. I think it was Chicago or somewhere, and we would like you to come in and fill the spot." And I said, "Oh my goodness!" I was overwhelmed, and so I said, "Fine," and I did it. And the first thing they had me doing was network breaks, promos for network programs. These are all live, mind you, not recording stuff, but doing network promos, and some system cues and some other stuff. And then that was my very first day. But then they had me doing a lot of other things, as far as all the local stuff also. And I I told the people at the station I had left to come to Detroit. I said, "Listen, I'll probably see you guys in about a month after they get wise to the fact that I'm just a new kid." And and they said, "Well, the door is always open for you. Come on back here, Chuck, when you know." So, but anyway, I didn't have to go back to the smaller station where I'd been working, and that in that particular case, it was Kalamazoo. And anyway, so that's how I got the job in Detroit. And then, of course, the dramas were well, the writers all had their offices there. Brace Beamer and John. Well, John didn't have an office there. John Todd. He was Tonto, but the guy who played the part of Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. Oh dear, I can't think of his name. Right,
Paul Sutton.
Paul Sutton, yes, also had an office there, and they had that whole wing of the mansion where the radio studios, were at that time, out on East Jefferson Avenue, and it was a huge place. I mean, the third floor had a ballroom, and that ballroom had been turned into a big orchestral place for the symphony size orchestra. And they had attached to that also, they had a control room for each one of these things. But for that orchestra studio, there was another orchestra studio, but that was out in what used to be the coach house. That was Studio G for garage, by the way. But Studio D was the one that we used for the dramas. And that if you've got that diagram, you can put that up, and I'll show you that's a layout of Studio D. And this is, yes, this is the way the studio was all set up for the dramas. 3 dramas originally. The Lone Ranger was, I think, the first one, and the second one, I believe, was I wasn't around then, of course, but I'm not sure whether it was Sergeant Preston Yukon or the Green. I think it was, or the Green Hornet.
Yeah, with the Green Hornet, then Sergeant Preston. Yeah,
That was the second one. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And these all took places there. By the way, if you look at the sound studio there, uh, you'll see it's that car door at the bottom of it, just above the word sound studio. That was the Green Hornets car door. They had to open and close. By the way, Casey Kasem, who also was one of the disc jockeys on the station, played the role of Cato. And then he wound up going out to the West Coast, like I did later on, also. And but he stayed out there. And Casey Casey died, I think, just a year or so ago, and all my old friends are gone. For Pete's sake, you get to be as old as I am, and you know you're kind of alone as far as any of the people you knew before. But at any rate, getting back to this, the acting studio only had one microphone in it, and these dots that you see are where the microphones are located. And this one was hanging from the ceiling. They were all hanging from the ceiling, by the way. And that's the one that the actors got around as well as the announcer, and and you worked that particular the microphone there in the acting studio, and in the corners of that, you'll see at the bottom a big easy chair with a T. That was where Toddo had his chair, John Todd at that time. And opposite that, in the other corner in front of the control room was raised up high at a higher level. And you can see that's a window going through from the control room into the studio. On both places, and also into the sound room, you'll see that a little longer window there, and then the VIP area, that was for an invited audience for VIPs or possibly sponsors or somebody like that. And anyway, getting back to that chair, that was the Lone Ranger's chair, the Brace Beamer's chair, easy chair. And the rest of us peons sat on it, where these benches on the two walls opposite each other on the sides where it says actors, and except when they had some lines, and then they would get up closer to the microphone to say whatever lines they had to say. And now when the people, let's stay in the acting studio for a minute. When the people who did the acting, whether it was me or whether I was doing an announcer's role or whether I was playing a part, now I joined them just for the last 2.5, 3 years of the existence of of both shows, the Ranger and the Yukon. The Hornet had just ended, and the way the thing was set up was well, if you can see, there's one S in there too. That now the S's being sound man and around this microphone in the acting studio. And he's the guy, Tony Caminito, usually I think was the one. He had in his left hand, I believe, he had a leather thing wrapped around his hand, a thong or whatever you want to call it. And he would hit that to get the sound of a fight, hitting and things like that. And that's primarily what he used to do in that particular studio, was for fights and things like that. And speaking of things like that in the acting studio, people weren't just standing around holding a script in their hand, standing there and reading the script. No, there's such a thing as when you're talking, or if you're especially in a drama, the dramas move, people move, things happen. You're jumping up and down off a horse in the case of the Lone Ranger, or you might be running up and down stairs. Well, the sound man in the other studio is running up and down the stairs, but if you're talking at the same time, you've got to have that in your voice. That if you're fighting somebody or running or jumping or climbing or just getting on and off your horse or whatever you're doing, you have to do that. And consequently, the actors were uh, physically uh, jumping up in the air and doing as if they were really doing that activity, what it is, whatever it was in the script. And as a matter of fact, some scripts even had the word effort in parentheses, and they're not always, but some of them did from time to time. That means if you're jumping up onto a horse or climbing or even handing something to somebody that's heavy, you're lifting something, and it's got to be in your voice at the same time, that so the audience can hear that you're trying to run or move, or you're hiding or you're jumping or whatever you're doing. It's got to be, if you're just standing there reading, you're reading your lines, but you've got to have this, your voice has got to reflect, because it's sound that's creating that theater of the mind, that picture of what on earth it is you're doing, and you're trying to talk or whatever you're doing at the same time. And so that's why a lot of people don't understand that. And as a matter of fact, the first time I saw it, I thought, wow, look at that. They're actually moving, they're jumping, they're doing the parts. I had never seen it before I came to this station. And anyway, and the actors are really playing the part. And you've got to, the other thing you've got to learn is a mic. That microphone was equal distance in all directions. In other words, it was it was an all direction type mic. It wasn't just a one-sided thing. And so consequently, you've got to learn, if you turn facing the mic, your voice gets more presence to it, as far as the microphone is concerned, as far as the volume is concerned. And if you turn your head to the side, it's like you're moving away from the mic when you really aren't, but you can, or you can take a slight step backwards. But you've got to learn how to, these are the things you've got to learn before you do your acting job. And I didn't just jump right into this when I first came to the station. In fact, I got hired by Chuck Livingston, who was the director of the Lone Ranger at the time, by accident. I was having fun with some of the guys, and sometimes I play, I'm using just different voices, and in one thing or another, I say, you guys think you can do. And Chuck Livingston overheard that, and he says, "Hey, what voices have you been doing these things?" I told him, well, I actually grew up on stage as a stage actor as a kid, and even into professional theater as a younger adult. And so he said, well, hey, I think we can probably use you from time to time. And that's what it was. I wasn't a regular every day at every show. I just, filled in wherever needed, or if somebody got sick, then and if my voice could come to, close enough to theirs, if their part was one that was recognized as a integral part of every show, one of the steady characters, I should say, then I had to change my voice to match theirs. And Gilly Shea did the old men. Raleigh Parker did some of them. Paul Hughes, he's the guy who had the gravelly, it was very distinctive voice. When you heard Paul Hughes, you thought Lone Ranger, but he was not the Lone Ranger, but he played the sheriff or one thing or another. And another one that had a distinctive voice. Well, Gilly was good with character voices, like Irishman in the he played, I think, the in the Green Hornet. I think he was the police captain or whatever, who was an Irish character. And Gilly Shea, of course, was good with Irish dialects and things like that. And some of them were better at different dialects, and others just had good voices that were recognized, like Paul Hughes. His voice was always the same, but he always and it was a distinctive part of that show. And actually, the actors played all three shows: the Green Hornet, the Ranger, and Sergeant Preston, and the Challenge of the Yukon. Uh, and uh, uh, but the stars only played their show, but the rest of the cast played all three shows. They all it got to be very well. Sameness. We did the Lone Ranger Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we did the Sergeant Preston Yukon every Tuesday and Thursday. And as I said, the Hornet ended just slightly before I got there, so I didn't have a chance to see that or have anything to do with it. But that's the way. It was sort of like a stock company, you might say, a stock, an acting company, a stock company. And the sound men in the sound studio, yeah, they had several boxes in there. If you can look at the diagram again, the boxes, there are some of them that are on the floor, and some of them are up on a table. Now, in the ones closer to the center of the things, well, it says gravel and wood, and this is, it, and no, I thought I put in their table, but I guess I didn't. But anyway, that was on the floor. That was on the floor. And that was for walking. And there's a mic hanging down from the ceiling on top of those. And these boxes actually were larger than they were, so that if you had somebody walking on gravel, the mic went all the way down to about, say 24 inches or maybe even 30 inches above the floor. And so all the sound man had to do was actually grab the cable that was hanging from the ceiling and just sort of hold it close to his feet as he was walking in the gravel or on the wood, to if they were walking on the ground and then walked up onto the porch of a saloon or something, and then in and out the door, there's a wood door there that somebody else could, and you see the red dots for the mics and the stairs. And the other one, now that one that we were just talking about was on the floor. The one that says gravel and wood up above that in front of the control room was on a table. And that's what they did the horse's hoofs on. So sometimes the horse's hoofs, also got up on the wood walk or a boardwalk or something like that. But then they had the gravel for that. And that one box with a question mark in it over by the doorway going up into the control room, with a big question mark there. There's a mic hanging over that one too. That was actually, so for Sergeant Preston of the Yukon and the Yukon King and the mounted police and all of that, that was for walking in snow. And to get that sound, they filled that box with cornstarch. That gave that crunch, that sound. That was the only way to get that perfect sound for walking in snow. And up in the control room, by the way, you can see where the engineers sat with this big control panel there, and that D, and that's the director's thing. He was up on a pedestal. He had a chair, like a student's thing, where they have one arm that sort of comes out and around, like you got a little table in front of you for your script and stuff. Anyway, that's where the director sat, and that was raised up so he could see down into both studios. And then in the corner there, where you have the other sound man and those three turntables, those were for the music eventually got recorded they recorded it themselves, and so they had the theme song and the bridge music for the Lone Ranger and the other dramas. Now, and they had two tone arms on each table, and they had also sound effects and wind and other rain or whatever, or fire going in, and they had two tone arms on each one of those. So if one of them got in towards the center, as it, you put it on the outside, and it would gradually, the way a tone arm did. I don't know if you remember. Oh yeah, well, the people we're talking to here remember just phonograph records, and not the newer generations, though. But anyway, so when that got into the middle, you take that other one, the other tone arm, and you put that to the outside, and then you crossfade from one to the other, and then you keep going. You can go on with the same sound effect forever that way. And so some horses' hoofs, if you have a big bunch of people riding after a posse or something like that, and there are some that have just singles and others, but then you had the ones they did by hand on the gravel and the woodwinds. They had sometimes, I think they had coconut shells and plungers. They had different things there for that. But anyway, that's the way it was set up, and it worked. Oh, the hole down here at the bottom, where it says hole, and there's two doorways. That's a little small place. Oh, I'd say about 4 feet square, and from floor to ceiling, and it was thin walled, but it was walled off, and the two doors were just so that sound man could go back and forth from one to the other. Usually it was kept closed, the door going into the sound studio, and so that no sound could leak into there. And now the one where they have, let's say the Lone Ranger and Tonto were approaching a town, rather, they didn't have any cities in those days, and where there was a big fire where somebody had robbed the bank and set a fire to the hotel or something like that to cover their escape out of town. And you hear the sound of the fire. Everything is in the distance. You hear people shouting and everything off in the distance. Well, your actors, except for, say, the Lone Ranger and Tonto, who was still out there by that mic in the middle, uh, are all back here in the hole. And that door is just cracked, just a slight, very open, just a tiny bit. And then as the Lone Ranger and Tonto drew closer and closer and closer to the town and the fire and whatever was happening, and all the noise of the people, then that door, they would open that door gradually, little by little, and that would bring the sound out, because you can't bring the mic to the sound. You've got to bring the sound to the mic, and the people then would file out of there and gradually up to the microphone, as the Lone Ranger and Tonto, or whoever was on the mic at the time, as they say, whoever was coming toward where the noise was happening, uh, uh, the rest of us came to join them around the microphone out there. And I think we're running out of time. Are we? I don't remember what time we started, but is there any final questions you want to
Oh,
have
okay,
about the
we got a
Lone
couple.
Ranger?
Are there any actors you really were good friends with? Any that were really warm, outgoing? Anybody that sure strike a bell with you, Chuck?
Uh, were there any actors? And I missed a word
Sure.
or two
Were there
there.
any of the actors that were really outgoing, really kind, really, nice to be around? They were really.
Oh, they were all like that. We were just plain people, and they were there every day, and it was like as I said, it was like a community theater group, you know, really, and even, well, even the stars were not that really. Uh, yeah, well, even Paul Sutton went out for a drink with the guys from time to time, but. But yeah, it was. especially all the actors and the sound man and I mean, it was a clan. It was fun. And, every day the scripts, of course, were differently, but the system was always the same. And the system is how they how they played these people. You could give them any script, anything like that, and they automatically knew how to, you know, as long as they understood the character they were doing and what kind of a, like, oh, we're doing a show, a Lone Ranger show. It's coming up. We're going to be recording it in a couple of weeks, and this is with what is it, the
Project Audion.
yes, with Larry
Groby.
Groby. And he found they got an old Lone Ranger script, one of the early ones. When I say early, I mean the show started in 1933. This was 1934, and it was, I think, in the fall of 34. So it would have been maybe at the most 18 months old. I mean, as the show would, and it's really interesting because I've got the script right here. It's very interesting. It's in several ways because the show hadn't matured into the kind of a show that we know today, you know, from hearing and seeing the Lone Ranger show. And as a matter of fact, I've got Larry's notes here. It said the Lone Ranger and Tonto, it was the early series, and the Lone Ranger and Tonto are not completely the characters that they eventually became. And both the script and the plot are a little different from the final years on the network and the syndication. And the opening lines, for instance, are not exactly the same. Let's see, what does it say here for the narrator? A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty shout of Hi-O Silver. Well, that word shout was up because I actually had to do this a couple of times. A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty Hi-O Silver, the Lone Ranger. You know, and then you would hear that, and then it comes back in nowhere in the pages of history. No, I guess there was something else about the masked man and his Indian companion Tonto fought for law and order in the early Western United States and so forth. And then the music faded out, and the horse's hoofs would come in. Nowhere in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear. From out of well, here's where the horse's hoofs come in. From out of the past come the thundering hoofbeats of the great horse Silver. The Lone Ranger rides again. Actually, that was Freddie Foy's thing. I got to do that, I think, twice. When Freddie was, I don't know, he was on vacation or sick or something. But anyway, I had to do that a couple of times. And then do the narration part, and they talk about Tonto as being the little. Let's see, the Lone Ranger was by far the most. Let me look at. Oh yeah, this is the announcer's script, isn't it? Yeah. Let's see, directed by Jimmy Jewell in those days. Jimmy still would come back into town and join us for of fun or two. He was the original director on the thing, or one of them anyway. Let's say, yeah, the opening is different. The Jewell Players is what we call the Jewell Players, directed by James Jewell, brings us another thrilling drama of the famous Lone Ranger and his wonder horse called Silver. A story of the early West when life was cheap and only the fittest survived to make the history of the Golden States. the Lone Ranger was by far, and this is still part of the announcer open. The Lone Ranger was by far the most colorful and mysterious character ever to ride the plains and prairies, and yet he was the most mysterious. Ah, how about that? None ever saw his unmasked face or knew his name. Not a soul in the vast territory knew where he came from or where he went. He seemed only to ride just for justice and to mete out punishment to the lawless and aid and courage to the law-abiding citizenry. Now, this was all part of the opening. None of that is in there anymore, of course. And now for our story and so forth. And the tracks were being laid across the vast state of Texas to bring in the railroad from the east towards Santa Fe. And then you have horses' hoofs coming in. Let's see, what does he say from that point on? A large band of riders, all of them desperate and rough to look at, and are riding down on the section of the country that has been spanned by the tracks. And far ahead of the riders, there's a large number of workmen laboring on in the broiling sun to stretch the tracks across the endless miles. Two men are in the lead of the band of riders. The one that is obviously a half-breed, part Spanish, speaks. And then he would say, "Senor Steve, I have the scheme for which we will reach." And then Steve says, "Well, Magdalena, being rich is just what I am to do, but we got to get a sight of heavy, muddy pronto, or else our band will be plumb busted up. We got to pay these men, and so forth." Anyway, and they referred to Tonto as a little old Indian or something like that a couple of times. Anyway, the part that Larry has me doing is, let's see, how did he describe that? The part he has me doing, and I love it. And actually, he said that this is actually the middle episode of a 3-part story arc, but it stands alone and is the best of the 3. And he said, "I was thinking of you to do the part of the warm-hearted, grizzled old rancher, Jeremy Pa, in quotes, Wiggs, who gets shot by the bad guys." Ooh. I hope I don't get hurt too much. But anyway, now what would my voice sound like? "Well, hey, but who was that masked man anyway? I'm Pa Wiggs. This is kind of a character. I probably will be sounding something like that. So when you hear it, you'll know who it is. Run him out of town, will you? Who was that masked man? What was he doing with my wife? Never mind that."
I love that kind of character. So
yeah, I did too. That's why I was real happy to do that. I mean, anybody say "On King"? No, that's Sergeant Prince. Anybody can say "Hi-Yo Silver, away!" And Tonto, "What you mean we, Kimosabe? What do you mean we?" Yeah, there's not one word for Tonto in here in this script. Never does he use the word Kimosabe. The show was too early then, and they hadn't figured out. And there's a couple of times that half-breed, as they called him, that with the Spanish accent, was throwing in. And I don't know if Fran Stryker wrote this script, why would he put French in there, mixing it with the Spanish? I can't figure that out. But anyway, but Larry said, "Well, let's stick to the script, because that's what I think is going to make it, give it its charm, instead of just being like all the other scripts that people have heard for the last 15, 20 years or however long it is." This one, they would see how the original had to, as the time went on and the show went on, then they finally changed the script and changed the character a little bit more and warmed people up, and did that. But these were always fun to do. They had a lot of fun, and it was just, Uh, I miss them. I really do. I
Hmm.
miss doing that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And and that's when Larry said, "Hey, do you want to do a show?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And we're gonna be doing it, as I said, sometime in the latter part of August. We've got two days. Oh, but it's not everybody gathered in one room around the thing. Uh, Walden, have you ever told people how these things that Larry and these other people put these things together?
Not
Yeah,
how he does.
by
Yeah,
Zoom?
everybody does it a little differently. So you want to know how the Larry does it? He probably has a different style. So
Oh, yeah, well, see, Larry's in Texas. I'm in Michigan. Somebody else, another voice. I know another guy that I know might be doing one of the voices, maybe even Sato in there, and he also was in Michigan, but we'll all be doing it by Zoom, just the way we are here. And somebody might be in Chicago or Washington State or California or somewhere else. By the time you get the thing together, and then the sound effects, I think Larry adds in Texas, and I don't know whether he puts those on it. That I haven't done this before, not this way. But I don't know whether he puts the sound and the music and the stuff together with the acting at that time, or whether those are added in later. It doesn't make any difference, but it's interesting, and also I think isn't that going to be played for the convention too? That this
It's still to be determined. I just got off the phone with Larry prior to our conversation here, but it sounds like at least if one of those, if not the lights out one, are going to be presented. So it'll be interesting to watch in either
Well, I hope
case.
it's this one because I want to
Yeah,
hear it
I
back.
agree. I think it would be appropriate for what we're doing this at
Oh
this
yeah.
convention. Yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, guys, is there anything more you want to do
well,
or cover? I mean, there's a
up to you,
whole lot.
Zach. Any more
I mean, I
questions?
could go on for the next 10 hours. I think.
I do have a question of sorts. Chuck, you spoke not only spoke very fondly of WXYZ, but you laid it out in a detail, because today has been a very much a WXYZ reunion panel, more or less. Um, can you talk to me about how you felt when those dramatic programs started ceasing in terms of
Oh,
regular rotation?
oh, oh no, 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 no. Because the theater of the mind is what I'll tell you, there was one thing I wanted to do today, but it wouldn't fit in. And that was one of my favorite things back in the 50s, yet still, which was part of the theater of the mind, was a guy named Stan Freberg.
Yeah,
Oh, and
yeah.
I was going to get a clip of him and his takeoff on he did, like, for one thing, and they did this with sound effects and everything else, and these were on CBS, and I used to play these even on my disc jockey show. I had to get permission, to do them. But anyway, he did one where he was building a big ice cream sundae in Lake Michigan. I mean, that went all the way from Michigan to Illinois to Indiana, and then he had the Canadian Air Force flying over to put a cherry at the top of the damn thing. And he said, now let's see you do that on television. Okay.
And that's something that can only come from the theater of the mind. That's not
Yes,
something that, yeah.
yes. Yeah, of course, Stan is dead now. They're all gone, but unfortunately, I'm glad I'm not. I
Hmm.
intend to live another 30 or 40 years. Oh, by the way, last week was my birthday, last Friday.
Hmm.
That's well, in August. You won't hear this in August, but in August, I was 93.
Yeah.
And I still feel like I'm 63 or 53 or something like that. And I intend to live for another 20 or 30 years at least.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Agreed. In the
But
last, yeah. Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
but I mean, all the guys were just, that was the end of stuff that people had all their lives. For some of these people, from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, for that was what, decades there, that these people that were involved in these shows. There was a fourth show that some people don't know about, that was not long lived at all. It was back during World War II, and it was called The American Agent. It was sort of a 007 type thing. With the Nazis and that stuff. But that didn't last all that long. And another thing, at one time, the biggest network, as far as number of stations concerned, was the Mutual Network. And I didn't know this until I read it in your monthly magazine. Is that what you go?
Oh, the radiogram. Yeah, the radiogram.
Yeah, radiogram. Yes.
Yeah.
That is. I don't know who the people who write these things do their research really good. But anyway, the Lone Ranger, when oh God, I could tell you stories about him, but the Lone Ranger was. Oh, come on. George Trendle. George Jr. was one of my closest friends, and that's, as I said, I could tell you a story you wouldn't believe, and I can't tell you there because I'd have to leave town. But anyway, George and I were really we had a lot of fun. But anyway, at one time, it was the Lone Ranger, and primarily that was putting its own network together. George Trendle was putting it together. It was Trendle, Campbell, Muir wasn't in there then. It was Trendle and King. Well, that was King Trendle, they called it in those days too. But that was, his name was Cuntlier. I don't know. But anyway. And so they added WGN in Chicago, or one station in Chicago anyway. And so it was that, and WOR in New York. And those three stations were the beginning, all because of the Lone Ranger show. That was the beginning of the Mutual Broadcasting System, which became bigger than CBS or NBC. And that was, it was the biggest, and number of stations. And number of stations, and I didn't know that the whole network. Well, Sergeant Preston, we used to feed that every Tuesday and Thursday. We fed that to Mutual, but we had to feed it across the river to Canada, because CKLW in Windsor was a Mutual station, and so they fed it out from that to the Mutual network, but. Oh God, I could tell you some stories about the Mutual Network shows, like Queen for a Day, but that we'll save that for some other time.
We'll have to do a part 2 eventually. Well, Chuck, I'm good. Walden, are you good?
I am. Thank you, Chuck, for doing this again. We always love talking to you.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I haven't been out in California for a long time. I don't know that, from what I hear, that I want to go back out there right now, though. But when I do, we'll get together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chuck.
Yeah.